and then we'll hop into our questions. So our first question, first things first, what is the Facebook RPM program?
I'm happy to take this one. So the Facebook RPM program, it's designed to develop future product leaders by empowering, mentoring, and enabling all of its members to learn across Facebook's products. It's a full-time employment opportunity, and it doesn't require a technical degree or industry experience in technology. We get to work on lots of high priority projects across our family of apps and other products like Oculus. And so these products are used by over 3 billion people. It's an amazing opportunity.
Awesome. Does any speaker want to add on to that?
I think Valerie covered it pretty well.
Cool. And yeah, something that Valerie said, right? And as alumni of the program, for all our speakers, it doesn't matter if you've been trying to break into product management for so long. The RPM program accepts newbies, like totally newbies. You could be finding out about PM today, like what Courtney did when she accepted, when she put in her application, and still be successful in the recruitment process. So let's hop on to the next question. Is the Facebook RPM program open to students outside of the United States?
I could attempt to take that. So I don't think that we can speak too much to like the work authorization part, but on the website, when you go to apply, you do have to have work authorization in the country that you're applying to. But there are positions outside of the US. So we do have Tel Aviv and London offices as well. But if you have any concerns, definitely feel free to reach out to a recruiter and they can give you more information. That'd be good.
Cool. Third question is, how is the RPM role different from a normal PM role?
Yeah, I'll take that one. And I think I also just want to call out, there's a lot of resources online that like Facebook RPM program has published. So there's a website that you can go to and different things like that, where everyone can learn about like some of these questions. So like there's definitely like a lot of info there, and there might even be some stuff related to visa information. I'm not 100% sure, but I would definitely say like go online, even our Instagram, check out the resources. There's a lot that you can learn. And there's also a lot of questions, I think, even on the Facebook page that have been asked and answered there. So definitely use those resources as you're figuring out if you're applying and when you're going through that application process. But to answer the question, so how is RPM different from a normal PM role? The first thing is there's the R, right? So the R stands for rotational. And what that means is when you join Facebook, you spend a month onboarding, which is also an incredible situation that Facebook offers. That's pretty different, I think, than other companies you join. That's really geared at getting you up to speed on Facebook culture, introducing you to PMs, and like starting to create your network. And then you spend after that about 6 months rotating on 3 different teams. And I think what's really cool about the rotational aspect of it is it's not only about going through rotations. It's very specific that each rotation you go to should be pretty different than the rotation that you've previously done. So it's really about getting this holistic knowledge, like as an RPM that you'll take like with you into your PM career, which is pretty different than a normal PM who would start at Facebook and they would stay in one role. I think the average is about 18 months. Obviously they could stay on a single team for 4 years or something like that, but they're kind of starting on one team. There's a few other things that I want to highlight, which is the scope is pretty different from a normal PM versus the RPM. So RPMs, when you're coming in, you have less than 1 year of product management experience versus PMs who are either starting new at Facebook or you would be working with, they have many years of PM experience. And so what that looks like is you'll be joining a team that is already run by a PM and they have a large amount of scope and they will be giving you a part of their scope for you to work on. So you do have a smaller scope compared to that PM. But it's a really great opportunity for you to learn from that mentor that you're kind of paired with throughout those 6 months. And so also what that looks like is they have a larger team that you're then nested in. So as a part of the scope, you also get a part of the engineering team, a part of the design team, a part of the research team, but they're kind of still in charge of like that larger overall team. And again, they're essentially like your manager. There'll be one kind of per 6-month period that you're working with, because again, they have that expertise to kind of help you throughout your time. So I'd say those are kind of the biggest differences between somebody who's an RPM or a PM. I do want to just mention one final thing to be super clear, which is you're both PMs. So all the skill sets and like the scope that you're given is still a PM scope. Like you're still developing the same skill sets. And once you're out of the program, you're just a PM. So there's really no difference between what you're learning, developing, the expectations and things like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry. Yeah, so like from what I'm hearing, the RPM program is really great for, getting exposed to a bunch of different products to really find, your niche. So you start out as like a general PM and then you move around trying different products, different technologies to find out where you would want to specialize in, if you want to specialize in the first place. Does that sound correct?
Yeah. So like, for example, I mentioned I was at Apple prior, I was on hardware. And like a big question that I have is, do I want to be a software PM or a hardware PM? And in most companies, you would just have to pick one and then try that for a few years and then try to switch. And it would kind of be more difficult versus my first rotation was software. And now my second rotation is hardware, which is really awesome because after a year, I can make a much more informed decision about where I want to continue growing my career.
And do you get to choose which team you're assigned in? And then if you're assigned to that team, are you the only RPM in that team, or do you have peer RPMs in that team as well?
You do, unless Isabella, you want to continue. You do get to choose your different rotations. So the first rotation is the one that you will have the least choice in when you do start. You can like put what your interests are, but you aren't actively like choosing from a list. For your second and third rotations, there's a list that comes out and you go through essentially a matching process where you learn more about the projects, learn about like what the PM, who you'll be working with and like the team, and then essentially you submit what would be your top choices and you get matched based off of your interest and the PM's interest in you as well. And I think there was a second part to your question. I don't remember what it was.
Are you the only RPM in your team?
I think traditionally for each PM that's like your direct manager in the team, you will be the only RPM. There can also be other RPMs like within your broader team, like if you're working on the same product area or something, but not necessarily on the same like
PM.
Specific team. Yeah.
Gotcha. That sounds really cool. At least, you have a network where you feel supported, like all of you being new RPMs, but at the same time, you have your own set of projects and ownership that you can really make an impact with and showcase later on. Sounds super amazing. Any speaker would like to add there, or should we move on to the next question?
I think Courtney and Isabella covered it really well.
For sure. So next question is super broad, and I'd love to hear from every speaker. How has your experience been so far being part of the Facebook RPM program, being part of the whole association? What was your, what was like the most shocking experience for you? Any surprises when you joined, or what was your favorite part of it?
I can go first, and then some of the other speakers can take a stab at answering this question. But I think my experience so far, I've been having a pretty great experience, especially coming from a non-tech background. I was especially very anxious and kind of nervous going into this role. Was nervous about interacting with engineers or like doing something wrong. But I think the program really sets you up for success. And everyone you work with is like just very compassionate and very kind, and they will explain things. Like your engineer's not going to look at you weird if you ask them like, oh, can you explain this to me? They will actually be very happy and very willing to explain things to you. So I think I've been enjoying my experience so far. Asking questions and curiosity will get you a long way. I think I also really like, one of my favorite parts is especially on rotations, I can experience different team cultures. So when I think about like when I want to build like my permanent team once I graduate from the RPM program, I think about what aspects of team culture I do like, what things didn't work so well. So I think that's one of my favorite parts, just that trial and error aspect, because working as a product manager, people are at the core of it, and you kind of have to really like discover that part, and this program really does allow me to do that. So I think that would be my favorite aspect.
Maybe I'll take it next. +1 to Aimee on learning how to build a strong, healthy team culture. I love it just rotating through so many teams, because I think every product team is different in how they run. And you can kind of take the best from each and apply that to your own team when you leave the program. I think other pieces that are specific to Facebook that I've just been super impressed with as an RPM. One is I joined when COVID had just hit. So the first cohort that was impacted by COVID. And I think Facebook's response to remote work has been very flexible. And as someone who is early career, this is my first full-time job out of college. I felt really comfortable working remotely and learning how to be a PM during all of this. So I think that was an amazing piece of the program, is the flexibility. And I'd also say, you know, when I was an undergrad, I was going back and forth on whether a rotational program would advance my career faster than just going straight into a PM role. For example, at Microsoft, if you're a PM, you're just placed onto a team and you don't rotate. And I was going back and forth on which one was, quote, better. And I don't think there is a right answer there, but I do think a distinctive advantage to rotating that I've loved is that when you're a more senior PM, if you can look back over experiences that are very diverse, like different teams that are at different stages of the product lifecycle, you're going to have a broader knowledge base to draw off of when you're making decisions. And I really feel like my career has been growing pretty quickly, even though I rotate every 6 months. And I think that was the best part of the program for me.
I could go next. I think I second everything that Aimee and Valerie have said so far. Definitely, I think my favorite part of the program so far has been the mentorship. So coming from like a completely non-technical background, I definitely felt a lot of imposter syndrome when I started, of like, how am I going to figure out how to do this? Like, was it just by luck that I somehow landed here, since I literally learned about it the day that I applied? But I've had some really amazing mentors, especially through my managers. So throughout the program, you get 2 types of managers. There's your RPM manager, who's your manager for like the entire 18 months. And then their PM, but just on a completely different team. And then you get an OPM, who is your manager on your direct team. And that changes every 6 months based off of your team. And it's kind of like a unique opportunity, like what Valerie was saying, like through the rotations, that you're exposed to a lot of different teams and people, but also like PMs that have different strengths. And so you can really like learn from them, shadow, and there's like no direct like classes or training on like how to be a PM. You're just learning by doing. But there were so many times it's like I would see someone lead a review and I'd be like, I really love the way that they did that. And then I could just schedule time with them and be like, you know what, I have a review coming up. Like, can you talk to me about like how you think about this? And like you really start to learn a lot about like different best practices and frameworks that you can use from like a wide set of people. And then beyond just PMs that you interact with, there are also like designers and data scientists, and like all of them have knowledge that are really important also for the PM role. And so it like doesn't just limit you to learning from just product managers. And that's been really impactful for me.
Okay, well, you kind of stole what I was going to say, but I can come up with some other stuff. So I think there's like 2 ways I think about it, which the first is what's great about being at Facebook. And I've really enjoyed my time at Facebook. I think the culture that Facebook has built is at least seemingly very unique. I haven't been at any other companies other than Apple. But like the amount of collaboration that people feel towards each other and really execute with, the willingness to help, like we were talking about, you can ask questions to anyone and they're kind of going to help teach you things, has been a really incredible part of the experience, and makes me feel really happy that the RPM program exists at Facebook as compared to another company. So that's kind of the Facebook answer. For the RPM program, I think going off of the mentorship, the people that you're meeting, I really love learning from people that I surround myself with. And so you're put in a position where, especially for your second and third rotation, you get to pick, like, what is the team and group of people I'm going to spend the next 6 months learning and growing from? And that type of autonomy and agency in your growth, I think, is really incredible. And also, because you're in the RPM program, you have a free pass to schedule meetings with literally anyone. Like, they can be very senior and you say, hey, I'm an RPM, and they'll still meet with you and give you that time. It might be 15 minutes instead of 30 minutes, but like, they'll still meet with you. And so I think that is probably one of the most exciting things. And I even have it as a goal where every week I try to meet someone who's not related to my project, someone who's completely new, just to hear about different perspectives and kind of see what I can learn from them. So yeah, I think that's what I would highlight from the RPM program.
I really resonated a lot with what you said, about the value of, jumping across different teams and really learning from different PMs that you get to work with, right? Because product management is an art more than a science. Even though there are hundreds of frameworks out there on, like, how to write a PRD or how to prioritize, at the end of the day, each PM sort of has their own ingredients, right? Each PM has their own ways of storytelling. It's really about the more exposure you get to people who are good at what they do, and then how you take that and model it, and how you can make your own sort of twist around it, is what will set you apart as a PM in the future. So that's a really good thing to point out. And we'll move on to the next question, but thank you for sharing and bringing color to your experience thus far in the program. So what do you recommend aspiring RPMs to keep in mind while applying to the program? So apart from the deadline, apart from the deadline being, in sort of less than 48 hours, well, now that their time is limited, where should they be focusing their energy and their efforts in as the clock starts to tick down? Go ahead.
Cool. I can take this question. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that there's 48 hours left to apply. The first thing I would say is, like, when in doubt, just apply. If 1 year ago I would have doubted myself and not applied, I would not be in this position right now. Not applying, you're already saying no before, like, someone else is giving you the opportunity to say no. So just apply. You never know where that can take you. Facebook is not looking for a particular type of person. As you can see, based off the panel, we are very diverse in our backgrounds, who we are. So just, to try not to tell yourself no just because you don't think you have the right background. There is no specific background that they're looking for. I'd say number two is, like, practice makes perfect. There's, like, a plethora, like, so much information online that you can find, whether it's articles, books like The Code and Conquer. There's, like, a bunch of resources out there that you can find, whether it's free. I would recommend free resources that you can find online. There's a bunch that you can find and help you practice. And they can help you practice for, like, the two different types of interviews at Facebook, where they're called product sense and product execution type questions at Facebook. So there's a lot of resources online that you can read about. Number two, I would say practice bringing frameworks or structures to more ambiguous problems. I know when I was practicing, I would start looking at, like, my apps on my phone. I would open up an app, whether it's like Spotify or like some apps that I used to read, like my web comics. I would open it up and see, what would I improve about this? How can I apply a structure to how I want to improve things? So again, practice makes perfect. So practice bringing structure to things that you would have never thought about putting structure to. And I would say last is, like, just think out loud. Maybe you don't have a mock interview partner. Maybe just record yourself, open up your laptop, your phone or something, record yourself talking or going through a structure, listen to the words that you're using, and maybe try to incorporate more vocabulary that you hear other product managers use, or have you heard people use in mock interviews and things like that. So I would definitely say just apply and just practice however you can in any ways that can help you.
And if I could just add to that, I like second everything Ame said. And I think with practice, also like acknowledge, like don't force any frameworks. Like there's a point where after the books, like you have to actually just like logically think through the problem that's presented to you. And so like Ame was saying, like a big part of that is just starting to look at things in your everyday life and think of structure more than like, I need to make this framework specifically work. And then I think that helps build comfort when going into an interview and makes it feel like a lot more natural, because there's already a lot of stress that people feel about interviewing. So just try to get to the point where you can feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think maybe like just building off of that a little bit more, I think when like your interviewers like want to have a discussion with you, they don't want you to just talk at them. And so even if you have a framework in mind, like don't just heads down do your framework, right? Like it should be a conversation where they might ask you specific questions, and like you should really be able to have that conversation, and it might go down a different path than what you'd pre-planned in your head, but don't just get so stuck on pre-planning that you can't like have that conversation with the interviewer.
Valerie, do you want to quickly add to, the tips, 48 hours left, where should I, focus my energy on?
I really think they covered the bases. Don't doubt yourself, practice, and really, I think these, practicing that logical thought process that Courtney and Isabella were talking about, that will help you so much when you're on the job. Like the interview is very representative of what it's like as a PM. So I think it'll help you even beyond the interview.
Yes, and fortunately enough, here at Product Buds, we actually have a PM interview prep channel where you can find mock interview partners. Plus, my teammate here, Anish, is also running a PM Power Interview Prep series. So there will be a series of meetups and sessions to really practice answering product sense questions. So if you're not yet on the Product Buds Slack community, my team will drop the links in the chat and just join, head over to the channel and get practicing basically. And I know Valerie earlier, before we started the event, you mentioned something about the essay. So one of the questions that I briefly read in the chat was, cover letter is not a requirement, but should one go above and beyond and like attach a cover letter, or would you say, they should just incorporate whatever message they want to send through the essays?
Yeah, so I'm not a recruiter, so I'm not like the source of info on this. I'd say I didn't submit a cover letter. I don't think it's required. I don't think that's how they evaluate you. I think they're really looking to understand, is this person, do they have the potential to be a great PM? And I think whether you send a cover letter or not probably won't add a lot to that decision. I think the interviews themselves will answer that question.
And to just add to that, we're also not doing referrals this application cycle. I don't know if that's come up so far, but like what you are submitting as your resume and those essay questions is what you're evaluated on. So like that's what you should focus on.
For sure. And, really echoing what Isabella said, right? Make the interview conversational, make it human, right? Don't just memorize the framework and sound like a robot. And the more you practice, the more you can have your style, and the more you can feel confident and prepared for the interview. So thank you for that. Now we'll hop on to the next question. Some words of motivation to aspiring PMs. So not necessarily our PMs, but any aspiring PMs on their product journey. I know there's a mix of us here. Some people took such a long time in their PM journey. I know Darsh, he shared his story on LinkedIn, how he interviewed more than 24 times in Microsoft. Before he was able to break into the big tech and into the PM role, right? So sometimes it takes months and months, and sometimes it's only weeks, right? Like Courtney, who, you know, learned about it, applied, and got in. So any words of motivation for those who are in their product journeys?
Yeah, I can start with this. I would also say like sometimes it's years. There's people who are in the RPM program who have been in industry for over, you know, maybe 8 years, and they were doing a role such as research or data science, which is something that works really closely with PMs, but they weren't a PM and they might have been aspiring for several years and were kind of slowly working their way to be able to make that move. So however long it's taking, I would definitely say don't give up. And I think the way that I like to think about it is there's like my first goal and my second goal. So the first goal I always have for myself is I need to always be growing and learning, because I know that'll help the future version of myself in whatever role I'm currently in. Then my secondary goal was like, I want to be a PM. And so I think what's really valuable in that is even if the role that you're in right now isn't directly like a hop over from PM, I'm sure there's skills that you're learning that will be really helpful for you when you do make that transition. And so not overlooking the opportunity that you're currently in, and like really making sure that you're ingesting those learnings as much as you can. And the moment that you aren't learning, making a transition, even if it's not PM, to something else that maybe is one step closer. Maybe it's a team that works really closely with PMs, like I was mentioning, research or data science, so that you're still always growing and learning as kind of your first priority. And I think if you do that, like you're always going to get one step closer to hitting that PM path. And I think kind of the second part of that I would also add to is like, you don't need the job title PM to start doing things that PMs do. You can start flexing some PM muscles by making a strategy note, trying to improve your team culture or different things like that, especially at Facebook and at other companies as well. Like even say to get promoted, like you have to be acting at that next level, or to become a manager, you should have been acting like a manager for at least 6 months for that change to happen. So if you think with that mindset, if there's any opportunity in your current role for you to kind of start acting in that role, that's also a great way for you to kind of maybe create an opportunity for yourself, and at a minimum, like start practicing skill sets that PMs need anyways.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. Everything like Isabella said, huge +1. You definitely don't need a title to act like a PM. I also want to say, like, framing it for perspective, like going into interviewing can be very stressful, very not fun, anxiety inducing. So I do want to say mindset is key. Try to keep a positive mindset. It's stressful enough already. So if you go into it trying to be positive, it can make it a better experience for you, better process for you. And you want like the interviewer on the other side to see you as a PM. So try to tell yourself you are a PM, approach that interview like you are a PM, and you just want to showcase to the other person on the other side of the screen that you are a PM. And yeah, I just want to say like mindset is key. So, you know, keep your head set high and be positive.
I'd also add on 2 things. So first is, I think you can analyze products in your everyday life too. And so if you're worried, like maybe there's not many leadership positions in your current path, I think you can also start building that mindset and that ability to look at a product and question, who do they serve? What's their business model? How can it be improved? Because when you're a PM, you're going to be thinking about that all the time, not just for your products, but also competitors. So it's great to build that muscle. And I say the other thing is, you know, Darsh, who's a part of the Product Bugs organizing committee, he really used this as an opportunity before he was a PM to flex his PM skills. And I think it was a part of what got him to Microsoft today. And I bring that up because we had chatted before, we were friends in college, and I remember him coming to me and asking this exact question, like, what can I do to be a PM? And he found a problem that he felt and he went out and solved it. And it was outside of the workplace. And look where we are now. Like there's so many of you and we get to chat about PM programs. So there are so many ways to be creative about this and show your abilities.
Exactly. You don't need a PM title to be a PM. You can live out product management principles in how you approach even yourself, how you how you do personal improvement, how you iterate and improve writing your resume. I saw Isabella unmuted. Do you want to quickly add? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say like another part just on the motivation piece. Sorry, the sun keeps like, I keep scooting and it's following me. But I applied to the RPM program twice. The first time I didn't even get an HR screen. And then the second time after I improved my resume, I was actually able to have that HR screen. And I think like something that I like to really think about is I then stayed at my Apple job for another 6 months just because of how those timelines worked out. And in the end, it actually ended up being way better for me because I had specific opportunities at Apple that were huge growth opportunities for me that I like can now take with me into the RPM program. So if you're in a situation where like everyone's applying now, it doesn't work out this round, like definitely apply again. Like you shouldn't never like don't not apply because you got rejected once, and really just use that time in between as opportunities to continue growing yourself.
I love that you shared that rejection story, Isabella, because, you know, most of the time, right? Like the journey to PM is such a competitive field. If you look at one product team, the ratio is 1 PM is to 3 to 5 to 7 developers to 1 designer, 1 researcher. It's super competitive. Everyone wants to get in it. And, you know, people will normally face a lot of rejections first, right? That's the norm in being in this path. So thank you for sharing that story. And you know, if like hopefully like the program cannot take everyone in this group, but how can candidates, if they don't get in, still leverage the things that they learned in this application process, despite not getting into PM this time around? So are there any similar roles that you would recommend them to take on first? What kind of projects should they start tampering with as they wait for the next cycle of recruitment for some of the APM programs or RPM or the RPM program of Facebook? So Isabella, you touched on a project at Apple that you said were a huge growth opportunity. I guess like what factors made that a really great growth opportunity for you as a PM, and where else might, you know, people identify those type of opportunities so that they can continue developing into becoming a PM, even as they don't make it this time around?
Yeah. Well, I think everyone's so different. So I think it's kind of hard to give like a generic, like, this is the role that you should try to get like as a next step to a PM. I think in so many roles, there's different things that you can learn that will help you as a product manager. I do think I was a program manager, which like you can look up the difference. There's so many different analogies to the difference between program and product management. But I do think program management like feeds really well into product management. I will say that just based off of my personal experience. The specific project that I was mentioning, this was when like COVID was going on. And so I got to lead the initiative at Apple where we manufactured 10 million face shields and donated them, which was like a really cool, unique, random opportunity that I was like felt very fortunate to be able to lead. So it was, for me, I was senior enough such that I was given the opportunity to lead this program. And it was really the first time I'd been handed the reins on something like that. Because like no one's going to give me a whole iPhone to myself, right? But like face shields is something that like I could take on. So I think it was really like a timing situation where I was lucky to be given the opportunity. It wasn't necessarily that I like switched roles into something else to try to get me to be a PM, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. And sounds like it was such an impactful role too, right? Like face shield. And was that amidst the pandemic?
Yes. They were face shields due to COVID.
Amazing. If you know, there's one thing, right? It's one thing that you would want to highlight on your resume and even in your interview is what was your impact, right? Not just describing what you've done, but why is it important? What did it actually result to? So
Yeah.
Any projects that would allow you to have, impact of that scale, definitely try to get that experience under your belt. Any other speakers who want to touch on the question?
I'll add just one piece to it. I'll say that as a PM, you work with so many different functions on your team, but I think if you spend a few years building expertise in one function, it can help you quickly create trust with your team, because you can leverage that expertise to show that you can help and add value and that you know what you're doing. And so I think it can be a great asset to spend time in other roles before you come over to PM. I know the director in my current org, she had a long journey where she started as a journalist and moved to strategy, then finance, then over to PMM, and now is PM. And she's still a director. She is so good at what she does, and she's very well-rounded because of it. So I think that it can really be an asset. It's not just delaying your time to a goal that you want.
Yes, no time is wasted, because a PM role, it's very generalized, right? Like you're the glue to everyone. You need to understand, you need to have a basic understanding of tech, design, even the domain space. Let's say you're gonna work on a healthcare app in the future. If you have experience being a nurse, being a medical technician, those sorts of knowledge and experience from the past will help make you a better PM once you become a PM for, let's say, a health care app, or if you're involved in the health tech industry at all. So right now, since we have about 12 minutes left, we'll pivot to some audience questions. So first question we want to ask from the crowd is, what types of experiences should we be highlighting on our resume if we don't have PM experience? So maybe one speaker here can answer coming from a new grad perspective, and then the other from a career transitioner perspective. So if we only have one page on the resume, and all of us are go-getters, so we can have 10 resumes if we want to, with 10 bullet points each, but we only have one. So what are those types of experiences, projects, skills to highlight as we're applying?
Well, sorry, so you unmuted first. You
Okay, I'll keep mine brief and then I'll let you guys chime in. I think one, I don't feel super qualified to like give direct advice here, just because I haven't been in a recruiter role where I'm like going through all these resumes and like really able to say what stands out and what doesn't. I will say like a general framework that I've heard is it's really about like communicating who you are through your resume. So not that you were involved in like 15 different clubs or organizations, but maybe it was really 2 that you had super powerful impact in, because those are really important to you. And so I think we were even talking about it earlier, but for the bullets that you have, like really focusing on what your impact is and not just here's a laundry list of items that I've done. That would be kind of more generic feedback that I would give.
Yeah, I definitely +1 that in like any resume advice that I give. I always say like your resume is not your job description. Like think about it as if you were going up for promo at your job. What would you specifically point to tell your manager that you drove impact, you deserve to be promoted? Like more or less that's what your resume is, that you were trying to convince someone that you would be the best person for this job. But there are definitely like certain skills that are like PM skills that I think are transferable across different industries, like whether you're working in healthcare or public policy, like my background, or even if you're coming from like an engineering background, and just really thinking about like PM is focused on like having a passion for building, making sure that you're really creative and scrappy with problem solving, that you're data driven, like whatever data that you may use in your job, whether that's like qualitative or quantitative, like really thinking about how you collaborate with other people on your team, because that's a big part of being a PM, and that's not something that you need to be in tech to do, just having like clear communication skills and being effective as a leader to drive influence. And if you can show that in your resume, regardless of like what your background is, I think that can be really powerful for showing the narrative of who you are and why you could be a good PM.
Anyone else from the speakers who wants to add what type of experiences should people be highlighting if they don't have PM experience?
I'll just add one more onto it because I think all of that was super comprehensive. I'll just say that PM is all about being a leader without authority. And there are so many situations where you can demonstrate that, or really reflect on those experiences and make sure you're ready to talk about them and communicate them in your resume, because they'll be very valuable.
For sure. And, you know, you can communicate all those things like what Courtney mentioned, right? Like as a PM, you have to be data driven. How can you not only tell someone, hey, I'm data driven, but show them that you're actually data driven? So that would be reflected in how you write your bullet points on your resume. Does each bullet point you have, do you have any metric attached to it, right? And it shows that you're measuring your impact and your success. You're not just doing things. Another thing that was mentioned was passion for building things. So in any of your roles, in any of the organizations that you've been a part of, have you started a program or a project from start to finish, right? Like what Isabella did in Apple. Do you join hackathons where you just, you know, find a problem and build things, right? Those are some of the ways that you can really show and not just tell that you have the qualities of being a great PM and you have a good potential to be one. Next question is, for those who weren't familiar with PM roles when applying, which I know a lot of us are, we just stumbled upon PM one day. Personally, for me, I didn't know about PM when I applied to Workday's APM program. And I remember going to my interview, Googling again the definition of a PM, right? Because PM is so different in many companies. I mean, there's common understanding of what the function is, but there's different flavors of being a PM. And so for those of you who weren't familiar, how did you, and there's a short time window, right, of when you submit your applications to getting that first round of interviews. So how did you prepare for your second round of interviews when you just learned about this function?
Oh, I mean, you got.
No, you can go first.
I was gonna say I could start because I literally learned about product management like the week I applied, and it was definitely a whirlwind of like, I remember I applied and then I reached out to a friend that was a product manager and he was just like, what did you do? Like, how did you apply and not know like what product management is? And so it definitely was kind of like a very hectic, like need to buy all the books and like look up all the frameworks and stuff. And then I realized like you have 2 weeks, like it's not possible to read like 4 books in 2 weeks and actually practice all these mock interviews. So I think a lot of what we've shared so far, like get a baseline understanding of like what a PM is and what the core skills are. And then it was like mapping that to my past experiences. Like I have not worked on a product, like a technical product before, but like what have I done before that has required me to like think through an ambiguous problem and solve that problem? What has required me to like work with different types of like people on my team that are working with like data or working with research, and like how did I approach those issues? And I think once you can like take that and apply it to your real life, it becomes a lot more intuitive of like what it means to be a PM. Like if you stop trying to like force it, like a PM is only someone that has like built a product and I've not done that, you're gonna psych yourself out. But like, how have I been a PM of something that I've done in my life? How have I thought through that? And then how can I apply that into like these frameworks that I'm seeing in these books and then make that feel more organic to you? I think that was like the breakthrough moment for me when I was literally like having a meltdown, like I'm about to have my interview next week and I still don't know what's going on. I was just like, all right, you can do this. You've done this before. It was just under a different title. So that would be my advice there.
Very, very similar to Courtney. I did not have time to read all those books. They're like these huge chunky books. So I was like, I only have like few days to prepare for my interview, I can't read these books. So YouTube was my friend. Just like watching something, being able to listen to something helped me a lot. There's like, you could literally put in like PM interview questions or something, and there's like a whole bunch of videos that will pop up. And what I just tried to do, I just listened to how they spoke. I tried to incorporate the vocabulary that they use into like how I would like speak through these problems. There's like a particular one that was like my favorite by like Selena Taylor. Selena Tyler. She's a PM at Facebook right now. And there's like an interview question that she went through on Facebook Watch, and like I just love that interview, and that I used to watch that interview religiously and just like copy how she would think about things. I was like, okay, how does she like dissect things? So I just like watch these videos and just try to be a detective and figure out like how they thought about it and just try to mimic them as much as I could.
Valerie, any story from how you prepared for your interview?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the best person for this question because I was super strategic about it because I came into college wanting to be a PM because I had known about the program. Actually, from my sister, she did hackathons and would bring home like job postings, and she handed me PM at Facebook when I was like a junior in high school. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. So when I was studying computer science, it was always something I was aware of. And my senior year, I was like, okay, I'm applying to APM, RPM programs. So I spent like July prepping, and then by the end of July, the application opened. So I felt like I was ready.
Gotcha. And we love a mix, right? Like what I said, some people in this community have been with us since we started last year. So really months of preparing for this moment, while others, are have just recently found out about PM and are about to wing it, like Amy and Courtney did. But Isabella, any sort of like tips in interview preparation?
I would kind of echo some of the sentiments. I did watch a lot of videos, and then I just did as many practice interviews with other people as possible. I think it was really great. There's like some people who I practiced with who were PMs, and they were just trying to switch companies. They weren't trying to get in the RPM program, and they were able to give me really good feedback that I was able to take versus, some people are also trying to do the RPM program. So we're all like, I don't know what the feedback should be. So it's like really nice sometimes if you get lucky and you can try to like find the PMs who are willing to interview and do mock interviews with someone who's a little less senior. I definitely found those to be the most helpful.
For sure. And so we have 2 minutes left. Last final question is, so you touched upon like problem solving and creativity earlier about like how Facebook values that in a PM. So how does creativity look like in Facebook, and what does Facebook value most in someone's problem solving skills? How do they assess this, and how is this vital to like the everyday role of being a Facebook PM or RPM?
So I guess the way I would answer this, I think it's less about how they would assess you on creativity that I could answer, because I think that's not something that you can really quantify. I think as you communicate your answers to questions, creativity is just sort of a part of your approach and your PM personality. So I don't think there's a way to kind of measure that. But I will say, like day to day on the job, I think creativity comes from just there are many different ways. For myself, it comes from deep thought. Like when I'm looking at the product that I own and I'm thinking about future work that I need to plan, looking at metrics and seeing how the product is performing and trying to play with where I think those metrics could go. Like looking at evidence to see what are users really relating to? What are my favorite parts of the product? What are gaps that I'm feeling? And how can I brainstorm ideas to solve those? And then I'll take those ideas and I'll bring them to my partners, like engineers and product marketers and content designers, and just get them in a room and we'll talk about it. And I think having processes that allow you to create great ideas is a really big part of being a PM. And I think that that's such a big part of finding really good product ideas, is getting different points of view in a room, as well as reflecting deeply yourself. And so I think, like, if your question is how can you bring creativity to being a product manager, that's how I would do it. And in terms of what Facebook values most, as the other part of your question, I don't think there's one make or break quality that they're looking for. I think it's a mix of qualities, and some people are stronger than others in different areas. You know, having a passion for building, making an impact, being scrappy, being data driven. You know, there's going to be PMs who are experts at any one of those, but maybe not as strong in other areas. So I don't think there's like a mold for Facebook PM.
For
Yeah,
sure.
I guess
Oh, go
I'll
Anya.
add it quickly. Valerie went through like a very nice example of like day to day how you can be creative. I think just to like add to that, some other ways that Facebook allows people to be creative, they create opportunities for people to be creative. There's like regular hackathons you can participate. I just participated in a hackathon where I'm very nerdy, so our group was building a comic book app basically for Facebook, and the only limit is like yourself, like the sky's the limit. If you can think of something and gather like a team and other people want to work on that for you, Facebook will give you those opportunities to do so. So I think that's like one way that you can like really like add on to your creativity and really like develop your creativity while Facebook.
For sure. And, you know, like a common thread there, right? Like what Valerie said is deep thought and really socializing your idea to others and then bouncing off ideas, right? Not being afraid to share what you have in mind and then getting others' input to help build on your idea to make it even more interesting. And so as you all, right, prep for the RPM interview, maybe you can look up common interview questions or some of the interview questions that people have submitted online based on their previous RPM interviews, and how can you start doing mock interview like what our panelists have advised, and based on those mock interviews, right, you can practice your answers and make it even more interesting as you do one mock interview and the other. And with that wraps up our RPM panel for today. Thank you again to all our speakers for your time, and for everyone here. You know, if you found this session valuable, if you are thankful for all our speakers, show your gratitude in the chat, in the reacts, and, you know, share about what you learned today. You can create a blog out of it, a LinkedIn post, tag our speakers, tag Product Buds, show your network that you are really passionate about breaking into the PM field, so that even if you don't get in this time, people around you are aware that you really want to get into the field. And maybe, you know, when opportunities come up in the future, they would know that, you know, you're someone they can tap into. You're someone who's proactive and who may have a good potential in being a PM, and maybe they can refer you in the future, but not for this program. But I'm speaking about like other regular PM opportunities. And with that, also just quick reminder, if you're part of the Product Buds community, or if you're not, we do have a resume review channel where you can send your resume there and have peers and mentors give feedback to improve your resume. If you want, you know, a second set of eyes, a third set of eyes to really kind of perfect it. And then also we have our PM interview prep channel where we are accepting registration to our PM Power Prep series to help you find mock interview partners for this recruitment season. And then we also have our product fellowship program where you will be part of a cohort of 30 fellows, 30 aspiring PM fellows. We accept new grads or industry career transitioners, anyone who hasn't held a full-time PM role before. So being part of the program will get you to, you know, 10 weeks of learning with this cohort and lots of fireside chats, building a case study to help you sort of start acquiring those PM skills and living out those PM principles even before you have a PM title yourself. So all the links will be in the chat. And as a reminder, 48 hours left to apply. Since you have limited time, limited resources, one of the key things of being a PM is how would you prioritize? You don't have all the time in the world. You don't have all, you don't have 10 engineers working on your feature. You only have you, right? So how would you prioritize your time and your efforts? And this is your way to be meta, to live that out. And with that, thank you so much for coming, and we'll stop the recording.
Henrika,